Hello and welcome to BookBytes, a book club podcast for developers. This episode is sponsored by Pluralsight, the technology skills platform. And today we're doing something different, and some of us didn't read the book. So actually, Jason, you had mentioned that you'd finished a book called Measure What Matters by John Doerr.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be interesting to ask you about it and have a discussion about it.
Sure. Yeah, I'll talk about it.
Yeah.
So I was recommended by a few people at work to read the book Measure What Matters by John Doerr. And John Doerr is I guess now kind of an investor type of role and also a big pusher for setting goals at companies and measuring them to get great results out of those. And he, I guess, would go to a lot of places and kind of do it as a consulting measure to say, hey, you need to go and implement this. And he was pretty pivotal in places such as like Google really early on, where he sat down with Larry and Sergey and was like, hey, you need to go and establish yourselves and figure out really what you're doing and how you know like if you're succeeding, because they had the tech, but they didn't necessarily have the plan. And so after having done that numerous times, I mean, he lists off a ton of names of companies that he's gone and put recommendations to, like in the Silicon Valley area, like Google, Apple, Amazon, and a number of them that are also specifically mentioned within the book as well. And kind of my synopsis or shorthand of the book is that it's a management book about how setting goals and measuring them can create success in companies both large and small. And the way that John promotes the ability to do that is by setting up what's known as objectives and key results. And he refers to them as OKRs throughout the book. And so the O, being the objective, is what you want to accomplish. And so it's something that is a clear description of what you want to do. So, I mean, it's the goal side of things. And then the flip of it is actually the key result, which is the how that you plan on accomplishing that goal. And so it is something that is either time bound or very specific on what you want to do. And you can also measure that and verify that. And a really important part of that is that when you complete all of your key results, then you can firmly say that you have accomplished your objective. Now, Adam, I think you had said that you had watched the TED Talk that John gave.
Yeah, I did. And really quickly, I just want to let the listeners know who's here today. It's me, Adam, of course, Jason, and then we're also joined by Safia.
Howdy, everyone.
Hi.
And Jen couldn't make it tonight. Yeah, so I watched the TED Talk called, actually, I guess it's probably just called Measure What Matters as well. So he's got a website, whatmatters.com, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really interesting how John didn't come up with this idea. He had a boss at IBM that came up with this idea, but then he really just took it and ran with it, and he's really popularized the idea and brought it to a lot of big companies.
Yeah, that was something that he was pretty adamant on mentioning in the book. Is his boss's name was Andy Grove, and he, I think, became most familiar with him at Intel. I think that was where they met. There may have been something before, but Andy was a big pusher for having goals and measurable results underneath of them. John actually talks about Andy leading a initiative they had there called Operation Crush at Intel.
Oh yeah, and I actually think it was IBM.
Oh, well, no, I think it was it. Maybe he picked it up from IBM.
I'm not sure anymore.
I'm pretty sure it's Intel, because Crush was specifically related to moving from producing RAM chips into microprocessors for Intel.
Oh,
and
okay.
so like asserting Intel's dominance there. So there came like a point in time, like when Intel, that's what they did, is they made memory and RAM, and they were starting to get displaced by Motorola. And in order to deal with that, they saw an opening in order to get into the microprocessor market because they were getting undersold by other companies, or like they couldn't match the price point. And so rather than going and trying to get their costs down on that front, they moved towards getting companies to adopt their microprocessor. And I want to say it was like the 8086, but I could be off on that. I don't have that specifically in my notes. But some of the ways that they went through approaching that was having a few OKRs established within their company. One of them was to land a certain number of design commitments. And so when they would go and come up with a design, they would actually need a place to go and sign on to actually want that chip or to buy it. And so like it was like a huge order. And so like they had to get so many of those, and they had an objective for those. I can actually go and like pull up that metric in the book. I think it helps go and clarify something. So give me just 1 second.
Safia, did you get a chance to watch the TED Talk?
I haven't. Most of my interest in OKRs actually comes from a personal experience that I had with them. And one of the organizations that I worked at started to introduce OKRs into like our workflow. So kind of have some perspectives on it and questions based on those that I'd love to hear from you, Jason, if John managed to address in his book.
Okay, great. Yeah. I was hoping some people had some personal experience with it. I've just recently started using them and had no idea this entire backstory about them.
Yeah, I really liked actually hearing that part of it. This is actually my first book that I've ever read or done dominantly through audiobook. I have always been more of just read it through. Like I like listening to podcasts, but it's a first for audiobook for me.
And how was it?
The audiobook was excellent. It was actually read by John, so it was read in the way that he planned on having it read to you. And then also, not only was it read by John, but there are specific accounts from various companies, whether it be specific people from Google, to have like Bill Gates read it in a snippet of it. He actually even has Bono reading it at the end. So it's really cool to actually have the real accounts read by the people who wrote those things too. So it wasn't even just John the whole time. And so it made it a good listen because it was switching between people, and you could also hear the emotions that they had and felt about the stories that they were reading. So I really liked that.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
I did go and actually pull those notes for the Intel Operation Crush.
And what do you mean by crush?
So the Crush was like the code name of the operation. So
okay,
they wanted to go and I guess crush the microprocessor market was their plan. And so they had a corporate objective in their company, and that was to establish the 8086 is the highest performance 16-bit microprocessor family as measured by. And so their objective, getting the highest performance 16-bit microprocessor family. But they then set up a number of metrics to actually say that they did or did not accomplish that. And so one of them was to develop and publish 5 benchmarks showing superior 8086 family performance. So it's actually like releasing benchmarks. So that's something measurable that you can accomplish. Like you either like done those things or you haven't, or you've done 3 out of 5, which I think that's what they managed to hit. And one of them is repackaging the entire 8086 family of products. And so actually going and putting a different marketing spin on them, which I think in turn from that, marketing was able to go and make their own objectives based on it. And then also they had like a date-based one as well that was a sample of the arithmetic coprocessor no later than June 15th, which is more of an engineering related goal. So from each of those metrics though, like, I mean, they have a date established, or like even some of them are still higher level, like key results that can go and pass down to specific departments or places within the company that they have a greater impact or that can do a little bit more towards them. But the key results are established at the higher level within the company. So there is some crossover on that front. Like it's never just dedicated to a single department. And I think probably one of the most important parts of it is that it was something that was applied across the whole company and visible across the whole company. A really key thing about OKRs is making sure that those goals are transparent and very obvious things that are known across the entire company. I think John points out really early that it's a very small set of people that actually know what their company's current goals are and whether or not they're truly working on those things.
Yeah.
So even when a company is using OKRs, you're saying people within the company don't really know?
So OKRs are a way of trying to combat that.
Okay.
Where in a common company case, like there can be some goals that are established, but they're not really well defined, or they have to pass through a lot of layers. Goals for a company may be designed by executives higher up, but like if they're not transparent or like actually delivered by the executives to the company as a whole, then it winds up passing from, you know, C levels to VPs down to directors, down to managers, finally down to individual contributors. And amongst that whole way, the message of what's really important could actually get lost.
Yeah, it's like a game of telephone.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's like they're probably not really trying to keep those things secret because they want everyone in the company to help contribute towards the company's goals.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I thought you mentioned that was interesting was you kind of pointed out the fact that when they were at Intel, the goals they were setting were kind of cross-department. And one of the experiences that I had with OKRs is they were just things that were used within the engineering team. So one of the things that I struggled with is kind of tracking those objectives over to high-level, like company strategy and vision items. So it's kind of like the reverse. It's like, how are these tiny objectives that I have as an engineer relating directly to the like top level goal of the company?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there's this place where like people have to meet in the middle, where like individual contributors to like their managers, and then like the CVPs and EVPs and all those funny letter combinations kind of have to meet in the middle to agree on things, or kind of shake hands on what the goals are. But that was one of the things that I struggled with when I was working with OKRs, is it felt like they were very isolated for me personally, and they weren't part of this like cohesive narrative around what the company was doing. And I think, you know, Intel seemed to combat that by making the OKRs not just something that one department was doing, but kind of like cross-department efforts, which is kind of interesting because I've usually heard about them in the context of like engineering teams. So that is interesting to know that the history was a little bit different.
That is something that John brings up in the book, is that it really does have to apply across the whole company to be the most effective thing. Otherwise, you can wind up with a gap or just kind of a culture mismatch between some places. I mean, he even talks about a few specific examples where some changes had to be made. Like closer to the end, they talk about a company named Lumeris, and they are kind of a healthcare transparency type company. Like they're trying to get, whether it be like costs or what procedures are available for certain rates in certain areas, available to kind of everyone, to open that up. But they also had a second part of their company that ran under a different name. And one of them was really conservative, and the other one was very like technology oriented. And one of the things that they actually had to do to like establish OKRs to work in their company, because they had them actually, but they really weren't working because not everybody was on board with them. But instead there were like a couple of managers that would try and gather them up last minute before board meetings. And so there was really no buy-in there. They actually had to go and merge those two companies under one name, and then they swapped out like a huge amount of their HR in their company. Like over half of it had to get replaced in order for them to go and establish that and fit it into their culture, because that's what they wanted. So, I mean, that sounds kind of familiar to your situation, where if it's only implemented in part of it, then you do have that missing link of, okay, we have these things established, and how do they tie into the greater plan and goals of the company? And I could see that as a huge gap.
Yeah, that's okay. Good to know that I wasn't feeling alone in that. The other thing that I found was interesting, you kind of mentioned the fact that they had this one objective where they finished 3/5 of it, or like 60%.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things that I had to adjust to when the organization I was in started to introduce OKRs was there was sort of this notion that your OKR had to be something that like you could only achieve 80% of. So like the idea was that you were always supposed to be very ambitious in the objectives that you would set, or maybe the key results. It was basically designed to where you were always like setting goals that were a little bit past where you thought you would land. Whereas in the traditional sense, you're supposed to set goals that you know you could meet.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an interesting process for me for two things. One, I had to kind of let go of the psychology that like a goal was something that I had to achieve and check off. And two, it was difficult to figure out what my 80% was when I didn't really have a baseline for what I could achieve or a way to quantify how I had done in goals before, because it was the first time we were kind of rolling out OKRs in this organization.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. So I've been in a company where we used OKRs, and it was the same thing where they were supposed to be hard things to achieve, and you weren't supposed to achieve all of them, maybe like 60%. And I don't know how you measure that with engineering things, really. It's like if you're writing code, you know when you're at 0%. You probably know when you're at 100%. But how do you know when you're 80% through?
Right.
Like as far as I'm 80% done writing this code for this feature.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a difficult level to go and measure it at, because I mean, I guess if you're 80% of the way writing the feature, but you can't ship the feature, then in one regard, like, I mean, you're kind of 0%. Like you haven't shipped. So like if that itself is a metric, like, I mean, it can be depressing in one side of it that you didn't accomplish it. But I mean, looking at it from a business perspective, like if you don't ship, that's not a success. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or that you should be penalized for it, but rather like it's you collectively as the company did not estimate it well or measure it well. And so it's actually something worth reassessing for, because that's one of the things that they talk on in it. Specifically to the 80% thing, that's one thing that a number of the companies actually varied on in their perspective of what they did with it. Like the book itself is not prescriptive in a single way of saying what you should shoot for. It does talk about some of Google's specific ways that they handle OKRs, and they actually have two types of them within Google. At the end of the book, they have a reference guide of what Google's internal OKRs are established on, and they have the notion of committed OKRs and aspirational OKRs. And so committed, you go in with the full intent of getting a 1.0 or like 100% completed, and you should try everything you can to get there. And then aspirational is something where it's definitely more vague to reach, and so that is more of they shoot for an 0.7 on those. And aspirational ones are ones that can actually bleed over the course of multiple goal setting periods. A lot of the companies do it on a quarterly basis, where they go and set a goal for it and measure it through the course of the quarter, and then at the end see like where they landed, and if they did achieve it, then go and attempt to set something else. But if they didn't, either to say like, why did we not make it? Like, why did we not accomplish this? And what can we change? Do we still actually value accomplishing this, or does it not really matter and we can just throw it out? Because sometimes that's what needs to happen.
So yeah, aspirational OKRs make a lot of sense to me, or aspirational key results maybe, because I was looking at one of the examples in the TED Talk. It was talking about the CEO or the head of Google Chrome, Sundar Pichai, and he's the CEO of Google now, but in 2008, he had an objective to build the best browser, one of the key results was 20 million users. And so I thought, that's a great goal, but that's completely out of your control. Hopefully, if you do measurable things that make it good, there will be more users. But ultimately, it's out of your control.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just wondering how often these things need to be measurable, but how often is it in your control versus out of your control?
Yeah, there certainly are things that are outside of your control. And that's even something that you should be reflecting on too. Like if you are in a, say, even like real estate type company and the housing market just flops and you aren't hitting your goals, like that's something that doesn't necessarily mean that you did it all wrong as a company, but it is something where at the end of that quarter, you should say, okay, well, we're not hitting this goal or we didn't come remotely close. Like, what are we going to do about it now? Because that's the other kind of major part of it is actually like the retrospective side of things. So it's not just like, did I achieve it or did I not? And John Doerr is very specific to call out that OKRs are not something that is supposed to be tied directly to compensation. And while it can obviously have an impact on it, by not tying them directly to compensation, it's supposed to reduce things like sandbagging, where people will go and establish goals that are kind of business as usual, like not very aspirational. And I mean, he brings up kind of the example of if somebody sets some huge goal and they only achieve 60% of it, but it's an amazing goal. Like say they set the goal of getting published in like 5 magazines or something like that, and they wind up only getting published in 2, but one of them is like getting a cover spot on Time magazine or something like that, or like New York Times, like getting huge coverage. And so they hit only 2 out of 5. So that's 40% of their goal. Whereas if somebody else made a really basic goal of, I don't know, like getting 6 or 5 advertisers to close on them or something like that, and they just get like local shops or something, like even though somebody like accomplished their whole, like a 100% of their goal, is that better than the person who shot big and only got part of it? And so to say that it needs to be tied directly to compensation is probably not the right choice.
And the other thing is it's not tied directly to promotions.
Right.
But like you said, I think it could be a part of that if you look at it and say that's actually a really awesome thing that you accomplished.
Yeah. It definitely is designed for putting people on the track to get promoted or compensated based on success of it, but shouldn't solely rely on it as like well, you didn't meet your goals, therefore you don't get your bonus this year, because that in turn will make people be really conservative. And I know, talking about Google in here, they had the example of Gmail when it launched, and I don't remember if you had to deal with the battle of trying to get an invite to Gmail early on.
I did not have that.
I had a couple of friends in my high school class that had invites, so I got one pretty easily.
I envy you.
Gmail was pretty aspirational in that they really pushed the limit with what their offering was. When Gmail launched, they actually launched with 1 gigabyte of storage, which was insane at that amount of time, where other places were offering more like 10 megabytes of free email storage. You could get a gigabyte with Gmail.
And then you could sit there on the login page and see it constantly go up every day, every second.
Yeah. Like that was so novel at the time, just to see it grow bit by bit, and literally, right? But yeah, when they did that though, like that was a game changer for email as a whole, because all of a sudden you didn't have to go and delete your emails, but instead you archived the things, which was effective within Google on its own for however other many places they used it. I don't know, they scrape it for all sorts of stuff like natural language and whatnot. But I think there was a quote in the book, and I don't have it attributed, so I'll have to go and dig that up. but it said that they shot for an order of magnitude larger because if you're just shooting for a 10% improvement over everybody else, that means you're doing the same thing. A 10% improvement means you're doing the same thing as everybody else. You're not really innovating it at 10% more, as you're just kind of making what exists more efficient. And when Google aimed for making Gmail, they decided to go something that was really big, that probably to some places to look at offering a gigabyte of storage seemed like an impossible feat, when they instead said, okay, well, let's offer this and let's do it in a way that we can go and measure it and make progress on it. Because that's probably one of the hardest parts of looking at the impossible stuff. And that is even one of the things that I think seems so impressive with a couple of the places brought up in there, like the Gates Foundation, for example. They were established in, I think it was like 2000 or something like that Bill and Melinda went and put $20 billion into a foundation and told it to go like solve big problems. And they had to go through spending, it was $1 billion a year was what they had to do. That was the one thing that was required out of them. But they wanted to be sure that they were spending the money in the best places. And so they had to know, were they even being effective in what they were going after? And so like one of the things that they wanted to do was increasing quality of life. And they managed to find out that providing things like vaccinations was a huge thing for increasing the lifespan of people in areas. And so I know that like malaria is one of the things that they plan on targeting. And so like the idea of like combating mosquitoes and malaria like just seems, I wouldn't even know where to start on the thing. And
yeah.
And yet, I imagine like when they necessarily set the goal, they weren't like, oh yeah, of course, this is all the things we need to do. But you do have things that you can go and measure. Like they talked about getting to a certain vaccination rate of like in 80% of areas, 90% of people are vaccinated within them or something was the type of metric that they had seen before. And so they went and took like the regional based approach, kind of reflecting back on like, Are the Star Engineer, where rather than solving, counting all the stars in the sky, instead working by galaxy or something like that, where it's like breaking the problem down. And it's very much in that same way where you do that. And then you still have like, you build a metric based on that. So yeah, both Bill Gates and then also Bono talking about the one, it's the One Foundation, and where they worked through eliminating debt from poor countries within the world. And they talked about the process of helping out a lot of countries within Africa. And one of the things that was a real shortcoming for them that they realized, and in part by John Doerr, was like they were in a board meeting and John Doerr actually pushed them to answer the question of like, who are you serving? Like, who are you trying to help? And it was, people within Africa. And John was like, well, do they have a place at this table? And Bono was like, oh, well, of course they do. Like, we're all here supporting them. And he was like, well, there's none of them here though. And so like, that was like one of the things that they worked through and actually established OKRs for. It was like within a certain period of time, they wanted to go and get X number of representatives from the regions that they were actually trying to help. So they could really be influential there. And like, so I don't know, there are so many things in there that I liked.
That is amazing.
Even from like those big initiatives like that down to even a place that I really hope could come to Salt Lake City sometime it's a company called Zoom Pizza.
That sounds so intriguing.
Sounds delicious. I just had some pizza tonight and I could eat some more.
Yeah. Like, the idea of like using automation to go and have trucks with robots in them that are baking pizzas. They have ovens on the trucks that are going and delivering them to you. that sounds so awesome to have delivery that is fresh out of the oven rather than, 30 minutes, like a pizza after 30 minutes is not the pizza that is mouth-watering. I don't care how good your bag is. Like fresh out of the oven is just.
And so I like this place that's a take and bake place. So I can take it home, make it in my own oven, then it's fresh.
Yeah.
But if I didn't even have to do the oven part.
Exactly. Like if you are like in a studio apartment that's 175 square feet and you don't have a full kitchen in it.
Yeah. Or if it's the middle of summer and you don't want to use your oven.
Relatable.
Yeah, you can still have a hot pizza.
Safia, how big is the apartment you're moving to?
Oh, well, it's not for sure that I'm moving into it. It was one of the ones that I was looking into. It's 175 square feet.
Okay. Does it have an oven?
Luxurious. No, but it has a microwave.
Okay.
It's a major bachelorette pad.
Well, maybe you can get robot-made pizza sent to you there.
Yeah, it's the future. We'll all live in really tiny houses and get food delivered to us that's cooked on the go.
Yes. The future will be great.
Yep. All with OKRs.
All with OKRs, yeah.
This episode of BookBytes is sponsored by Pluralsight. Pluralsight's the technology skills platform. You can see where your skills stand, master the latest technologies, and show off your expertise. They're currently hiring in Salt Lake City and Boston. I work at Pluralsight, and not only is the engineering culture amazing, but the culture in general is amazing. It's a place where people really live out the values. Our values of creating with possibility, being committed to something bigger, being accountable for excellence, seeking context with intention, and being our word drive everything we do. We work in small, cross-functional, autonomous teams. We encourage test-driven development, pair programming, and mob programming. We have a culture of continuous learning, and we have book clubs and discussion groups. Pluralsight was just named the number 9 best workplace and one of the best workplaces for women by Great Place to Work. Want to work here? Visit pluralsight.com/careers/engineering to learn more. That's pluralsight.com/careers/engineering. And for those listeners who would like to check it out, you can DM at Pluralsight on Twitter, and they'll send you a free trial code so you can log in and check out Pluralsight for yourself. And thanks to Pluralsight for sponsoring the show.
So one of my skepticisms with this is, how is it different from just setting goals? Because everyone knows about setting goals. And it kind of sounds like OKRs is just another word for that. So I wonder if we could kind of differentiate it. And then we may have said some of them, but if we can like specifically list them out.
Sure.
A big one, I think, is setting ambitious goals. So you're intentionally not allowed to play it safe with your goals and not trying to set goals that you know you can reach.
Yeah.
Yeah, that aspirational side is definitely it's an uncomfortable part. Like, I mean, even that has been something I've been trying to think for myself is finding things like, it's hard to say like, what can I not achieve, but more like if I was freed up to do whatever, or if I don't know, like if nothing was standing in my way, like what is it that I would shoot to achieve kind of thing. Like that's a hard thing to go and reflect on. And maybe that's the whole point of the exercise.
And then I guess another thing is that within a company, it's transparent.
Yeah.
And it's for the entire company. And then I guess also you have OKRs at the company level, and then you probably also have them at the department level. And then maybe even under that, like have OKRs for a specific team.
Yeah, that's one of the things that is also called out, is that OKRs should be 50% top down and 50% bottom up. So there definitely needs to be direction from the leadership of a company, so that way places are on the same page. But there also should be some time for people who are on the front lines actually doing the work to say, like, these are actually the things that we can do and measure. And yeah, like you said as well, having the transparency level, like it doesn't have to be going through a department. Like a department can go and establish an OKR, but also like I should be able to have visibility into what executives care about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the experience I've had. And the ones at the company level were a bit more vague and generic. They didn't specifically mandate how to do it, what tools to use. Then more at the lower level, you had more specific things that supported the OKRs above you.
Yeah. I guess that's a nice thing in that you can make decisions about what you're still working on. So it's not just like everything is handed down to you, but it does give you some backing to say, I am working towards this OKR, and like I'm going to move this measurement or work towards moving this measurement that the company as a whole is intent on.
Yeah, I think it's really motivating. It helps you know that you're contributing to the right thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I also like whether it's at the top level or even being able to see peers as well. So if the two of you were also working either with me on the same team or with me within engineering, or even if we were in different departments, that is also a place where there's transparency to see if there's overlap between us for any reason at all. It's also something that we can align on.
I think it really helps with cooperation between different departments and different teams. You know, you're all working towards the same overall goals.
I mean, yeah, you can see it because it's out there. And also there's a level of accountability. Like when it's said that like if you write down a goal, then you have like a 40% greater chance of actually accomplishing the thing just by writing the thing down. And then by exposing that goal to other people, you raise that percentage even more just by having other people aware of it. And so if you're going and listing objectives and knowing that everybody else can see it, like that can be a driving thing or hold yourself accountable.
Yeah. So, and then I think another thing that differentiates it from goals is the fact that there are objectives, and then beneath each objective are key results. Because in the TED Talk, it was saying the objectives are kind of the what, they answer the question why, and then the key results are the how.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a defined like separation, but the key results also do state that like if you complete all these key results, then you have completed the objective.
Okay.
It's so at least in terms of your definition, like if your set of key results under one objective don't accomplish that, then it means that you were kind of off in creating those, which isn't necessarily bad. It just means that like you need to go and reassess.
Maybe you were missing some key results.
Right.
Or you picked the wrong ones.
Yeah, that's the retrospective side of things.
And then another thing in the TED Talk that was really good, it said it listed some characteristics of good objectives. They're significant, concrete, action-oriented, and inspirational.
That's a lot of marks to hit.
Yeah. And then also said that they're a vaccine against fuzzy thinking. And I've definitely fallen in this trap of fuzzy thinking where I think, I have aspirations. I haven't defined what they are necessarily, but I have aspirations and I'll probably hit them.
So you could say you aspire to have aspirations.
Yeah. But objectives, when you're specific and you make sure they're significant, concrete, action-oriented, inspirational, you have key results beneath those that are exactly how you're going to achieve that. That's definitely a vaccine against fuzzy thinking.
They also work as a way of giving meaning to what you're measuring as well. John discusses the comparison between key result and KPI, a key performance indicator. He refers to them as numbers without soul or context.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's pretty rough on them. And I think it does make sense, though, because how many times have you been in a place where you've measured something that doesn't really have a lot of impact? Like, it can be kind of cool, but like, what are you getting at? Like, sometimes things like GitHub's commit rate, where you fill the little green boxes, where sometimes we can assign or attribute more meaning to those things than is necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like, what's an easy thing to measure? Oh, I know, like this thing has a number already, number of followers, or
Right.
you have commits on certain days. Lines of code written.
Yeah. Yeah. On its own, it's not that valuable. I mean, if your objective though is, say, I think you interviewed him a while back, Jake Lingwall. He worked at Domo for a while, and he is a published author that is kind of local to here. And in November, I think it is, he gets into a self-commitment to every day in November to write, like, is it 2,000 words a day? Is it, I don't know. It's something like that.
Yeah, it's called NaNoWriMo. Do you do that, Safia?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you do it?
I attempt to. It is quite difficult. It's a lot of words. It's about 50,000 words in a month is, I think, the rate you're supposed to go for.
Yeah. And so with that is actually a case where measuring word count is like that is your key result, because you intend on something like becoming a better writer or instilling a habit.
Yeah, that's valuable because you get an entire first draft of a book instead of rewriting the first chapter over and over.
Yeah, that is something, but you're defining the what before you're doing that. Like, you're not just measuring your words and trying to go backwards and assign meaning to it, but in the flip of, you're saying like, this is what or why I want to do this thing. And then you keep track of it in order to hold yourself accountable and to know like you did it or you didn't.
Oh, and I just found in my notes, characteristics of good key results. They're specific and time-bound, aggressive yet realistic, and they're measurable and verifiable.
Mm-hmm.
So that aggressive yet realistic, that's kind of a hard balance.
Yeah, it requires like a lot of introspection and I guess experience with OKRs in particular, which I think is one of my experiences with them is there's this kind of like the ramp on to an OKR setup is really hard, but I feel like maybe once you've kind of used them for a while, you've developed the intuition to work with them effectively. I guess as is the case with most things.
Yeah. So Jason, do you know if any people use this for their personal goals and not just within a company?
I would imagine that you could do it at a personal level. I mean, potentially you could go and make them more or less transparent. There is speaking on it, a person that I can think of that I don't know him specifically. I think his name is Drew DeVault, and he runs the website sourcehut or sr.ht, which is a set of developer tools. And one of the things that he does with that site is he tries to have quarterly financial transparency with the visibility of like how much money he's bringing in through donations, because SourceHut is built entirely open source. And he works on a couple of other open source projects as well. And his goal was to become financially independent based on open source, or like to not need outside employment other than doing open source work, and instead to be able to live on donations. And he made that clear of where he was at, and you could see how close he was getting to being able to do it. And actually, I am on his mailing list for SourceHut, and he brought up that he was able at one point to be able to move 50% of his time, so be able to stop working half time and instead focus on open source work. And I think now he's actually managed to make it to being able to work full time on open source work. And I think it's been probably motivating for him to go and see it, but also I think by him actually showing those numbers, sometimes that can actually motivate people to go and donate, where it's like, oh, it's so close, or it's amazing to see like people surviving on this, like doing a service and actually making a way on open source.
Yeah, so I haven't specifically been doing OKRs personally, but this quarter I kind of set some quarterly goals. There's kind of an overarching theme with some specific stuff under it, so it's kind of like OKRs. But one of the things that's been really helpful for me that's different than I've ever done in the past is I read them every day. Because I think it's really easy,
That's a really
easy
good
to
idea.
forget what they are and let them just drop to the back of your mind.
I love that idea.
Yeah, so I just have a recurring task every day that links to the note.
That is a great idea.
Yeah, I'm going to steal it for sure.
Yeah, and it's not my idea. I heard it on the You Need a Budget podcast, and he heard it from someone else. He doesn't even remember who.
Well, thank you to the originator of that idea, because it's really awesome. I feel like it's good to remind yourself, especially in goals that are very ambitious, to kind of bring it back to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, they just become this like daydream that you're not really pursuing, or you're not really tied to anymore, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I found that just having them at the front of my mind kind of makes them happen more often, because I'm thinking about them, reading them every day. And, you know, when I'm kind of looking at my to-do list, I'm like, okay, what am I doing to accomplish one of these things that I've been reading every day?
That actually relates to there's actually a second part in the book, and I don't think we have to get way too far into it because of time frame, but there's part 2 of the book called The New Work, and they talk about kind of continuous performance management, or they refer to it as conversations, feedback, and recognition, so CFRs. And basically it kind of boils down to having one-on-ones. And so rather than having annual performance reviews where you're like, did you accomplish your goals? Well, do you remember what your goals are? And like, oh, well, it looks like you did them, or it looks like you didn't, to a more of a model where you are having regular meetings with your managers on like what your goals are in a number of cases, whether it's setting your goals, progress updates on things you're doing. It talks about having two-way coaching. So both you receiving feedback from your manager on like, you're doing this well and you're moving the needle, and likewise pushing back up to your manager to saying like, I'm not getting clear signal from you, or I need this from you. And talking about overall career goals, and then also finally like performance reviews, but doing them on a small scale, on like, I think you're doing well right now, or like you just accomplished this thing, so great job, versus like extending that out to a full year's worth of time.
In a year, you can really get surprised and kind of blindsided by how your manager's actually thinking you're doing.
There's a definite bias too, where if it's just towards the end of the year, like, and you know that you have performance reviews coming up in the next couple of months, you're probably going to step it up a little bit more.
Yeah.
So by having it be continual, like you can give signaling to say, hey, I'm not content with where I'm at and I need change. And your boss can be likewise going back to you and saying, you need to work on this, or you're doing really well with this. And also being like, these are your goals. How are those going? And so like you said, with yours, kind of keeping those things top of mind rather than just something that you wrote down once and then revisit a year later to be like, oh yeah, I had set that resolution.
Yeah.
And I did nothing towards it. So yeah, that's an awesome approach to doing that. I did have one other thing that I wanted to bring up that might be worth talking about.
What is it?
And maybe we have to figure out later. It is OKRs for the BookBytes podcast. And so, yeah.
Oh,
like, I mean, that is something that maybe we can come up with here. Maybe we have to wait a little bit and like reconvene on it, because I mean, John Doerr does say like an OKR that you came up with in 5 minutes is probably not a great one. It should take a little bit of churning.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of each person individually going and coming up with ideas rather than brainstorming as a group.
Yeah.
Because you can really like dig into it on your own.
Yeah.
And then come together and you can have a really good discussion because you've thought about it yourself.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe we should break with the objective of setting goals for BookBytes, and a key result is each person comes back with one OKR that they can recommend to the group.
I like it.
I'm down with that.
It's a meta goal.
It's like a placeholder OKR.
That's actually something that even John talks about in the book, is when he initially met with Google. Like he did objectives on that first day, and it was to convince Google leadership to agree to accept OKRs and or to onboard it. And one of them was to finish his presentation on time, to be exactly 90 minutes, and to get leadership to approve a 3-month test of the program. And so like it was very much a meta type goal where he told them, he's like, this is my goal today. And like, this is my OKR for the day. And so like he was very specific. So he used it as an example to actually progress bringing those things on. So
nice. I like how Larry and Sergey agreed to it because they really didn't have any other system in mind.
Yep.
All right. Well, that sounds like a plan. And maybe we'll do a follow-up on well, maybe not maybe. Maybe one of the key results is that we do a follow-up on a future episode.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Well, thanks for listening. I hope you liked this episode. Let us know what you thought of this new format of just one of us reading the book and talking about it. You can tell us on Twitter at BookBytesFM, and I'm at Agarhar, AGARRHARR. Safia is at Captain Safia, and Jason is at State and Jason. And also, we're now on Spotify, if that's a place where you like to listen to podcasts. You can check us out there.
Woo!
Nice. Yeah. And as always, transcript will be at orbit.fm/bookbytes. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.